It's the middle of the day thousands of years ago. You have no clock, no watch, no phone, no calendar on the wall, no little numbers in the corner of a screen. And yet, somehow, you know roughly what time it is. You know when to wake, when to hunt, when winter is coming. For almost all of human history, people lived with no way to measure time, and it didn't slow them down at all. So how did they actually know what time it was? Here's the first surprise. A huge part of the answer was already inside them. Deep in your brain, there's a tiny cluster of cells that acts like a clock. It's called the body clock, and every human has one. It runs on a cycle of roughly 24 hours, all on its own, even with no sun, no light, no clues at all. We know this because scientists have tested it. People have lived in caves for months with no daylight and no clocks, and their bodies kept waking and sleeping on a steady rhythm anyway. The clock inside them just kept ticking. This is why, even today, you often wake up just before your alarm. That's not luck. That's the oldest clock you own. Ancient humans felt this rhythm far more strongly than we do. Their whole lives were tuned to it. But the body clock only gives a rough sense of time. For everything else, ancient humans looked up. And the very first clock in human history was the most obvious one of all, the sun. Sunrise meant the day had begun, time to move, to gather, to hunt. When the sun was directly overhead, it was the middle of the day, the hottest, brightest point, and when the sun sank low and red, the day was ending. Time to return, to gather close, to prepare for the dark. But ancient humans got far cleverer than just sunrise and sunset. They learned to read shadows. A shadow is just the sun's position, drawn on the ground. And shadows move in a slow, predictable way all day long. In the morning, shadows are long and point one way. At midday, they shrink to almost nothing. Then they grow long again in the other direction as evening comes. A moving shadow is a moving clock. Eventually, much later, this simple idea became the first real invention for telling time, the sundial. But that came tens of thousands of years after humans were already tracking the sun in their heads. But what about when the sun went down? When the world went black? Ancient humans simply switched to a different clock, the stars. We forget this now because most of us can barely see the stars, but to them, the night sky was dazzling. Thousands of points of light, and it wasn't random. The stars move across the sky in a steady repeating pattern, every single night. Certain stars rise at certain times. If you know your stars, you can tell the hour of the night just by looking up. Sailors used this for thousands of years. So did travellers crossing deserts at night. One star barely moves at all, the North Star. It sits almost perfectly still while everything circles around it. To an ancient human, that single fixed point was priceless. A clock and a compass in one. Whole groups of stars, the constellations, became a giant calendar written across the sky. Because the constellations you see change slowly through the year. The night sky in summer looks different from the night sky in winter. So just by looking up, an ancient human could tell not only the time of night, but the time of year. Then there was the most reliable calendar of all, hanging right there in the sky. The moon doesn't just light up the night. It changes shape on a fixed, dependable schedule. It grows from nothing to a thin sliver, then to a half, then to a full, round moon. Then it shrinks back down again. And the whole cycle takes about 29 days. That cycle gave ancient humans something incredibly useful, a way to count beyond a single day. They could say, "We will meet again in 2 moons. We travel when the moon is full. The baby will come in 9 moons." This is almost certainly the origin of the month. The word month comes from moon. Some of the oldest objects ever found are bones carved with marks that seem to track the phases of the moon, tens of thousands of years old. Proof that humans were keeping time long before they could write a single word. But the biggest clock of all wasn't in the sky for a single night. It played out across an entire year. The seasons. For ancient humans, getting the seasons right was the difference between life and death. Miss the signs of coming winter, and you might not store enough food. Misjudge spring, and you plant too early. So they watched the world around them like a hawk, for the smallest signals. The first buds on a tree meant spring was here. Certain birds returning meant the warm months were coming. Leaves turning red and falling meant the cold was on its way. Time to prepare. The first frost, the first snow, the rivers freezing over, each one was a page turning in nature's calendar. Animals were a calendar too. When the herds migrated, ancient humans knew the season had turned and often followed them. Their entire year was a story told by plants, animals, weather, and light. Eventually, humans wanted to pin these moments down exactly, and so they built some of the most astonishing things in history. All over the world, ancient people built giant stone monuments, and many of them were, at their heart, clocks and calendars. The most famous is Stonehenge. For a long time, people wondered what it was even for, but its stones line up precisely with the sun on the two most important days of the year, the longest day and the shortest day. On those mornings, the sunrise hits a single exact spot, a message across thousands of years. This is the turning point of the year. These weren't just monuments, they were enormous, permanent calendars built to never forget when the seasons turned. For most of human history, time was loose. The morning, midday, the evening, that was enough. Nobody needed to know it was 3:47 in the afternoon. Why would they? Life followed the sun and the seasons, not numbers. But as humans settled into villages and cities, something changed. Suddenly, time needed to be shared. If 100 people had to gather or trade or pray together, they needed to agree on when. And so, the day began to be sliced into smaller and smaller pieces. The ancient Egyptians split daylight into 12 parts. That's where our 12 hours come from. They used giant obelisks like enormous shadow sticks, tracking the sun across the marked ground. But shadows are useless at night or on a cloudy day, so humans needed something that didn't depend on the sun. Their answer was beautifully simple. Water, a water clock. Let water drip out of a container at a steady rate, mark the levels, and you can measure time passing. Day or night. For the first time, humans could measure time in the dark, indoors, anywhere. Time had finally been freed from the sky. For thousands of years, that was enough. Sun, stars, moon, seasons, shadows, water. But then humans invented something that demanded far more precise time than nature could ever give. Machines, trains, factories. A world that ran on schedules where being a few minutes late actually mattered. Nature's clocks were beautiful. But they couldn't tell you it was exactly 8:15. So humans did what they always do. They built better and better clocks. Gears, springs, pendulums, until eventually we built clocks so accurate they lose less than a second in billions of years. We went from reading shadows on the ground to splitting time into pieces too small to even feel. But here's something worth thinking about. In gaining all that precision, we may have lost something too. Ancient humans didn't feel rushed by time. They didn't watch a clock tick down. They moved with the day. They woke with the light. They rested when it grew dark. They ate when the day was high. Their time was tied to the living world. Ours is tied to a number on a screen. We can measure a billionth of a second. But how many of us actually notice the sunrise anymore? And even now, after all of this, time still holds mysteries we haven't solved. We still don't fully understand why time seems to speed up as you get older. Why a boring afternoon can crawl, while a happy year can vanish in what feels like an instant. We still argue about what time even is, whether it truly flows, or whether that's just how our minds experience it. The ancient humans staring up at the stars didn't have these questions, but they understood one thing deeply. Time wasn't a number to them. It was the turning of the world itself. So how did ancient humans know what time it was? They felt it, in the body clock ticking inside them. They read it, in the sun climbing and the shadows sliding across the ground. They saw it, in the stars wheeling overhead and the still North Star. They counted it, in the moon growing and shrinking month after month. They lived it, in the seasons turning from buds to snow and back again. And finally they built it, in stone circles and obelisks and dripping water. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had no clocks, and they were never once lost in time. They simply looked up, looked around, and listened to a world that was keeping time all on its own. The whole universe was their clock. They just had to pay attention. And maybe, every now and then, that's still worth doing. Looking up and remembering the oldest clock we ever had. It was here long before us, and it will be ticking long after we're gone.